So before the video, we're having a sound demo at the end of it. Hopefully the software I'm using isn't going to spoil the conversion and mess up the sound, but we'll see how that works and then go through the YouTube process. But the sounds you'd be buying off of us are going to sound really good. And how do you get really good sounds? And we're talking all 808s and low frequencies. How to mix an 808 drum. So I'm just pulling up almost like a rock 808. And I'm going to run it through some compressors, and I'm going to explain to you why and what I'm doing. And it's going to be very easy. On the Manly, there's not a lot of option. It's just sort of, it's hard to explain. So we're going to go in, I'm going to push play on this, and I'm going to explain to you before I push play on what it's doing. So on this compressor, on most compressors, you're going to have a threshold, a ratio, an attack, and a release. The threshold's where you're going to set it to where once it goes over that, we're talking volume-wise, once it goes over that threshold, when it's going to start, because every sound has a dynamic to it. So some people are like, oh, well, you just turn the volume up. No, there's a lot of volume within one given sound. You know, 80 hertz might be, 8 decibels lower than 90 hertz. 90 hertz might be 15 dBs lower than 60 hertz. So it's like that sound has its own genuine fingerprint. When you start using compressors and you first get into them, you usually end up screwing people's stuff up because you can't really hear your compression right off the bat. So you start making decisions with the threshold until you can hear it, and at that point you've made what we call flabby sounding compression or lifeless. That means you literally took the dynamics all the way out of the sound. The greatest engineers on the planet, they know how to control a sound to a point where it's very, very, very imaged and very focused. What compression does is it lets a sound sit within the song, so it makes space for other instruments in that song. And if you do it correctly, you can add creative to it, and you can add technically for sure. So what we're doing here is we're using a distressor liquid channel replication. But let me talk about the threshold. 2 to 1 is really a subtle compression. If you were going to compress coming into a recording and you don't really know what you're doing, a 2 to 1 to 1.5 is more like a mastering style. For every 1 it goes over the threshold, it's going to compress it 2 times, which that means, in sense, if you have a really drastic -40 threshold, yeah, you're still going to hear that result. But here's where the magic comes in. You start talking about 10 to 1. Okay, if you can get to the point where you're at 10 to 1, for every 1 over the threshold, you're compressing 10 times, or gain reducing. So you're making the low passes and high passes sort of fit together. So what I mean by that is, like I said at the beginning of this, 50 hertz was -10. Let's say 80 hertz in the song, frequency-wise, was 10 dBs louder than 50 hertz. So now we're going to start to conform those two together. Number 1, let's hit play on this. That's called pumping. So watch, how do we get rid of that pumping? That is a heavy amount of compression, but that's one that you wouldn't know it was compressed. I'm talking a lot, but you want to do a little less drastic. Let's pull this back up. A lot of low end 50 hertz on this one. Let's cut this back. It's about 6 to 1. Still has the beef. Now you have an attack at 8.3 and a release at 10, and I'm going to explain that to you real quick. Excuse me. The 8.3 attack means if I had that at 0, the attack time, right when that kick part of that 808 would come in, it would grab it, and it would actually make it sound lifeless. And that's what happens a lot with hip-hop guys, or guys starting in mixing. They don't hear it, and they do that right away, and they're trying to add this heavy amount of compression to make it sound like a Rick Ross album. And what happens is they screw it up, and then they send it to me, and I'm like, dude, you already compressed it. So number 1, if you don't know what you're doing, just don't do it right off the bat. Number 2, I have the attack at 8, okay? So it's like literally in milliseconds what we're talking about. That style compressor, I do it by feel, okay? Compression's all about knowing how and what you're listening for. So the attack, as you turn it to the right usually on a compressor, you're actually letting sound through before the compressor hits. So you're actually telling the compressor to start here, and on the release you're telling it to stop here. Do you see what I'm saying? The threshold's when it's going to start, period. When does the compressor engage itself? And then you have to really, once you get into this, you'll really understand that your makeup gain and things like that allow you to get different effects, and different compressors have different effects. They actually sound different. So one of the other things I want to show you, and I'll just show you with the basic EQ inside of Steinberg before we got to get going here. But a lot of these 808s that I put in the Loop Gurus pack, it's called the Hollywood pack, and there's another one I did the same thing to. Frequency range is 200 to 500 hertz. A lot of times you'll hear this low muffle, and getting rid of that might change that song for the better. It might change that song for the worst. I meant that sound, excuse me, for the worst. A lot of these 808s, I found out that the high end was just distorted because somebody must have tried something on them or screwed it up. So we'll do a shelving on the high end. I'm sorry, I'm sort of screwing this up. But we'll shelve the high end like this, and we'll bring it down until we just have what we want in that 808. We don't have all this other junk up here that was causing either, you know, clicks and pops. And I guarantee 90% of you guys out there have had an 808 where there's a click and pop up here that you didn't like. So we'll EQ the curve until we just got what we want. It might look like this, and it might even be cut off like this just because 30 hertz was a little too big. So this is the 808 kit pack, and I hope you learned something.